Thomas and Emily Wexler looked like any father and daughter, until police broke through a basement wall and uncovered a truth so disturbing it shattered an entire town's illusion of safety. Ashbury, Pennsylvania, was the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. The streets were lined with maple trees, the houses were neatly painted, and kids rode bikes through cul-de-sacs while parents waved from front porches. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. In a town like this, people trusted their neighbours, rarely locking doors and often leaving spare keys under welcome mats. Among the most respected families in the area were the Wexlers. Thomas Wexler was everything a small-town father was expected to be. He was dependable, soft-spoken, and always present at community events. As an accountant, he handled the finances for half the town. He coached his son's little league team in the summers and shoveled snow for the elderly during the long Pennsylvania winters. His wife, Linda, was just as beloved, an art teacher at the local high school who painted murals around town and hosted craft nights at the community center. Together, they seemed to live the American dream, raising 2 children, Emily and Jack, in a modest but well-kept home on Maple Ridge Lane. Emily was the oldest, a quiet and creative girl who loved to draw like her mother. She was the kind of child who was always polite, always smiling, but rarely the center of attention. Jack, her younger brother, was more energetic, often seen running through the yard with his glove and baseball cap, chasing after neighborhood kids. The Wexlers were the family others looked up to, the type you might see in a holiday card ad, smiling, warm, and whole. No one ever suspected that anything was wrong. There were no late-night police visits, no strange noises, no signs of distress. The family hosted barbecues, attended church, and helped organize charity drives. If Emily ever had bruises, no one asked. If her smile ever seemed a little forced, people chalked it up to shyness. It was easier to assume everything was fine. After all, bad things didn't happen in Ashbury, not to people like the Wexlers. Then, one day, tragedy struck. The news spread quietly. Emily Wexler had died in a car accident. She was just 10 years old. The community mourned with the family, sending casseroles, cards, and flowers. A small memorial was held by the lake, where Linda said they scattered Emily's ashes. People cried, offered condolences, and eventually, life in Ashbury moved on. Jack returned to school, Thomas to work, and Linda continued teaching. The Wexlers grieved in silence, and the town respected their privacy. Years passed. The house on Maple Ridge remained just as tidy, the lawn trimmed, the flower beds always blooming in spring. The only sign that anything had changed was the empty swing set in the backyard, gently swaying in the breeze. No one questioned how the family had managed to carry on. No one noticed that Emily's bedroom light sometimes flickered on late at night. No one suspected that something unthinkable had happened within those walls, until a sledgehammer broke through a basement wall, and everything the town thought it knew about the Wexlers began to collapse. It started as a simple home improvement project. Thomas and Linda Wexler had decided to renovate their basement. After inheriting some money from a distant relative, they chose to finish the space into a guest room and small office. A local construction crew was hired, and within days, the sound of hammers and drills echoed through the Wexler home. Dust filled the air, and the old concrete walls were slowly stripped away. The project was routine until a worker struck something that didn't belong. Behind one of the basement walls was a strange partition. It wasn't listed on the original house plans. The space seemed too narrow, almost like it had been built to hide something rather than support anything. The foreman instructed his crew to tear it down, expecting perhaps an old crawl space or forgotten plumbing. What they uncovered, however, would haunt them for years to come. As the wall crumbled, a chill swept through the room. Behind it sat a large plastic container, sealed tight with multiple layers of duct tape. The container was dusty, its edges worn, but it was clearly placed there with purpose. Something about it felt wrong. The crew paused, unsure of what they had just found. After a brief discussion, they called the police. When authorities arrived, they cleared the area and opened the container with care. The smell was immediate and sickening. Inside were old, stained blankets wrapped tightly around what appeared to be human remains. Investigators worked through the night, carefully removing the contents. What they discovered was almost too much to believe. Small bones, fragments of children's clothing, and the unmistakable shape of a child's skull. DNA testing was ordered immediately. Within a few days, the results came back. The remains belonged to Emily Wexler. The news spread through Ashbury like wildfire. People were in shock. Emily had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. There had been a memorial, a cremation, even newspaper announcements. Now her actual remains had been found buried in her own home. The implications were horrifying. If Emily wasn't killed in a car crash, then what really happened to her? Detectives began to piece together the timeline. They scoured the hospital, system for accident reports. There were none. No police report, no emergency room visit, no coroner's file. The funeral home that supposedly handled Emily's remains had burned down just months after her memorial, destroying any physical evidence of cremation. Everything about her death began to look suspicious. Neighbors were interviewed, teachers questioned, and photos reviewed. Some neighbors recalled hearing strange noises late at night during the year of Emily's supposed death. A few admitted they'd seen her bedroom light on more than once after the funeral. Still, no one had ever thought to speak up. Why would they? It had been easier to believe the official story. No one could have imagined the truth. As the investigation deepened, the focus began to shift. People wondered, how could Emily's body have ended up in the basement? Who put it there? And why did Thomas Wexler, the grieving father, seem increasingly nervous as police returned to his home day after day? The answers would soon shake the town to its core. As the investigation into the remains in the Wexler basement intensified, police began to scrutinize every detail of Emily's reported death. Nothing added up. There were no records of an accident, no hospital admissions, no police logs, and no tow truck reports from the supposed crash site. The more investigators searched, the more obvious it became. There had never been a car accident. Emily had vanished, and no one had noticed. Detectives visited Emily's former school and pulled her attendance records. Her last recorded day at school was a random Tuesday in early spring, 5 years prior. After that, she simply disappeared. No withdrawals, no explanations. Teachers remembered being told she had died in a tragic accident, but no one questioned it. There was grief, sadness, but no suspicion. The Wexlers had been a well-liked family. People mourned with them, not doubted them. Investigators then turned to the memorial service that had reportedly been held at the local lake. It had been brief and simple, with no actual burial or public viewing. The ashes had supposedly been scattered over the water, but there was no death certificate filed with the state, and the cremation paperwork was suspiciously incomplete. What made matters worse was that the funeral home that allegedly handled everything had burned down a few months later. With it went any trace of whether Emily's body had ever passed through there at all. More troubling signs began to emerge from the evidence collected inside the Wexler home. In photos from the months following Emily's death, there were subtle clues that she may not have been gone at all. In one photo, taken during a 4th of July barbecue, a child's face could be seen faintly in the upstairs window, looking out toward the backyard. A neighbor later confirmed that the room belonged to Emily. Another set of photos showed her bedroom light on well past midnight on multiple occasions. It was always brushed off as a forgotten lamp or an electrical issue, but now it carried new weight. Investigators also found medical records that told a different story. Emily had multiple emergency room visits throughout her childhood, often for vague injuries, bruises, sprains, and a broken wrist. Each time, Thomas had been the one to bring her in. He claimed she was clumsy or had fallen down the stairs. None of it was questioned too deeply at the time. The signs had been there all along, but no one had looked closely enough to see them. Behind Thomas's carefully crafted image as a loving father and responsible citizen, a far more disturbing picture began to form. It became clear he had manipulated everything: the story, the documentation, the grief. He had created a believable tragedy to cover something unthinkable. Now, with the body discovered and the lies unraveling, the pressure mounted. Thomas became more withdrawn as police returned to the house repeatedly. He cancelled appointments, avoided calls, and stopped coaching. Linda appeared confused and frightened, unsure of what was happening. Friends began to whisper. Something was wrong inside the Wexler home. Something that had been hidden for years, just like the tiny skeleton behind the basement wall. As suspicion mounted and the evidence pointed more clearly toward Thomas Wexler, investigators decided it was time to confront him. They returned to the Wexler home early one morning with a search warrant in hand. But when they arrived, Thomas was gone. Linda answered the door, confused and shaking. She said Thomas had left before dawn without explanation. His phone had been turned off, and he hadn't said where he was going. Immediately, a manhunt was launched. His car was found later that afternoon, abandoned at the edge of the forest near the Appalachian Trail. Inside were only his wallet and a few clothes. Investigators feared he might be trying to flee the state, or, worse, end his own life. Police dogs and helicopters were deployed. For 2 days they searched the surrounding woods. Just as hopes were beginning to fade, Thomas was found hiding in an old ranger station several miles from where he'd left his car. He was cold, tired, and defeated. This time, he didn't try to run. At the station, under intense questioning, Thomas finally broke. What came out was a confession more horrifying than anyone expected. Emily hadn't died in an accident. She had died in the house, late one night, after suffering internal injuries from abuse Thomas had inflicted. He said, it had been an accident. He hadn't meant to hit her that hard, but when she collapsed and stopped breathing, panic took over. Instead of calling 911, he wrapped her small body in blankets, placed her in the basement, and began constructing a plan. The next day, he told Linda there had been a car accident. He said Emily had died at the hospital before she could be revived. Shocked and grief-stricken, Linda believed him. Thomas used his connections and knowledge of paperwork to forge documents. A false death certificate, cremation records, even a staged memorial. He claimed the ashes they scattered at the lake were hers. In reality, they were nothing more than wood ash from the family's fireplace. Over the next few weeks, Thomas quietly built a false wall in the basement and sealed his daughter's remains inside. He lived with the secret for 5 years, attending work, coaching baseball, and posing as a grieving father. Whenever questions came up, he had answers. And because he was trusted, no one doubted him. The lies worked, until the renovation shattered the illusion. Linda, devastated by the truth, cooperated fully with the investigation. She had never seen the signs, never questioned the details. To the world, she had mourned the loss of her daughter. In truth, she had been living above her daughter's hidden grave. She filed for divorce immediately and moved away with her son, Jack, hoping to protect what little remained of her family. Thomas Wexler was arrested and charged with murder, abuse of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. The man once seen as the pillar of the community had hidden one of the darkest secrets imaginable, and now the truth was finally exposed. The mask had fallen. After the arrest of Thomas Wexler, the town of Ashbury was left in stunned silence. People walked through the streets with downcast eyes, struggling to reconcile the man they had once admired with the monster they now knew him to be. The Wexlers had been woven into the fabric of the community for years. Now, it felt as if that fabric had been torn apart. The house on Maple Ridge Lane, once a symbol of warmth and family, became a grim landmark of betrayal. The trial of Thomas Wexler drew national attention. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, and every seat inside the courtroom was filled. As prosecutors laid out the timeline, the evidence, and the full extent of the cover-up, the horror deepened. Medical experts described the injuries that led to Emily's death, while forensic analysts detailed the conditions in which her body had been hidden. There were photos of the container, the false wall, and the belongings buried with her, each detail painting a picture of cruelty disguised as normalcy. Linda testified, her voice trembling as she explained how she had believed everything Thomas told her. She had mourned her daughter sincerely, never realizing that the real story had been a fabrication. Her pain was visible, raw, and heartbreaking. Some in the courtroom cried with her. She had lost her daughter, her marriage, and her sense of reality, all in one brutal sweep. The jury took less than 2 days to return a verdict. Thomas Wexler was found guilty on all counts: second-degree murder, child endangerment, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. At sentencing, the judge spoke firmly, stating that Thomas had committed a crime not only against his own daughter, but against the entire community that had trusted him. He was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In the months that followed, Ashbury tried to move on, but the scars remained. Parents held their children closer. Teachers became more alert. The Wexler home was left vacant, its windows boarded up and the lawn overgrown. No one wanted to live there. Rumours swirled about strange noises coming from the basement at night, and some claimed to see a small figure in the upstairs window, watching silently. Whether true or not, the house became a place people avoided. Linda and her son Jack relocated to another state under new names. Jack was given counselling, and Linda started over, doing her best to heal from the trauma that had consumed her family. Though she would never forget Emily, she hoped that distance might offer them a second chance at peace. What haunted Ashbury most wasn't just the crime itself, but how easily it had gone unnoticed. The signs had been there, subtle, quiet, and easy to ignore. In a town built on trust and appearances, no one had imagined that something so evil could grow undetected. Thomas Wexler had worn the perfect mask, and by the time it slipped, it was far too late. The truth, long buried beneath a wall, had finally come to light. But for many, the weight of that truth would never fully fade.